those of you who know me also, oh, got it, recording. So those of you who know me know I have some technical issues with my phone. So I'm gonna have to do this kind of action. All right, and what do you guys see? You see this print, right? So this first body of work, the gallery is actually very nicely set up for the show that I wanted to put together. It has sort of 4 quadrants, and so each quadrant is dedicated to a different body of work. So this first body of work I shot with film, but I also shot using the wet plate process. And it's quasi untitled right now, but the series deals with the loss of culture that can happen through generations, and not only for people who emigrate to a new place themselves, but also the subsequent generations as well. And so this piece with the ruler is actually the first piece that I did in the series, or this was actually the impetus to the larger series. The image is of a ruler, and if you can't read the text, I'll get a little closer, but it says, if I spoke my native language at school, I would get hit. And this is actually a family story. This is my grandfather's story. And so I wanted to sort of look at mundane, commonplace objects within this context of loss of culture and assimilation. So what I did for the rest of the series was the same thing, where I photographed one object and I paired it with a very short first-person narrative. I kept it as first person and also non-specific as far as culture or ethnicity, in an effort to have it be a little bit more universal on one hand, but also something that people could step into. So the first person aspect, you can put yourself in the place of the person who's speaking. And by keeping it non-specific as to ethnicity, people could also imagine it referring to their particular culture or ethnicity or family members or themselves. And so I don't know if you guys can read the text on these. So these are tin types. It's the wet plate cloning process. So the images are actually created on the metal plate in camera while the chemistry is wet. And what I did was, for these, I hand stamped the text directly into the plate. And so this one reads, unable to find the right ingredients. Let's see. I started making less ethnic food. It's a picture of a hamburger. And this one says, to receive an education, I had to worship a God I did not believe in. And it's a picture of the Bible. This one said, my decision to attend college was controversial in my community. And so after having the initial impetus from my own family stories, I started listening more closely to other people's and other families' stories having to do with immigration and assimilation. So this particular image of the books and talking about the decision of going to college being controversial didn't come from my family, but at the opening, when my mother read this, she said, oh, that's me, which I didn't realize. And I haven't had a deeper discussion with her about that, but I sure will. This one is a baseball glove, and it says, I played sports to fit in. This one is children's blocks, and this one's also actually hand-colored. The plate is hand-colored with pastels. And it says, when I was young, I refused to speak my native language. And in listening to other people's stories of assimilation and loss of culture, I actually kind of realized that the pressure doesn't always come from without. It can also come from within yourself, within your community. So it's a much more nuanced issue than I'd like originally thought it to be. And this one is a little girl's dress, and it says, "I dressed my children like all the others." And so this was the primary project I was working on during my residency, the one that I focused most closely on. And that first image, the silver print, the black and white print, the way I got the text into that image was I just typed it straight into the negative with an old typewriter that I have. And I'm usually pretty anal retentive about my negatives, so that was kind of difficult for me to do. Cringe. And so this is another section, which actually has a little bit of an installation element to it. When I was photographing some of these pieces up in my studio, I had a bunch of razor blades suspended with fishing wire from the ceiling. And I thought they were really beautiful. And I was a little bit nervous to ask Carol if I could hang a bunch of razor blades in the gallery. But surprisingly, she said, sure. She said, go for it. But we have this nice little barrier so people can't walk into them. And so working more closely with the wet plate process, one thing that really fascinates me with it is just the fact that you're creating images on metal, or if you're doing amber types, you're creating images on glass. And I was just really fascinated with that aspect of it, the materiality of working on metal. So I started doing some images, aside from that primary project that I just showed you. These two are actually the next three pieces pertain to self-harm. And so in this one, I actually I drilled holes in the plate and stitched with red thread. Can you see that? Sorry, I'm having a hard time steering since I have to look at the front of the camera. Okay, or of the phone. Okay. And then in this other piece, which was actually the first piece, and you can see this is the piece that had the razors hanging on the fishing wire that the installation came from. This one, I stamped the letters into the plate like with the previous project. And it says, what you call self-harm, I call self-preservation. And this work has to do with a lot of like the misperceptions that I think exist in the world when it comes to mental health, even in fields that you would think would have a better understanding of mental health challenges and responses people have to stress or trauma. And this is a diptych. Again, stitching into the plate with red thread. And then in the text plate on the bottom, I took a garbage plate, a messed up plate. And, oh, I can't even read that writing so much. She etches into her skin the words that others project upon her, I believe is what it says. Sorry, I don't have my old person reading glasses with me right now. And so some of this work, with a lot of the work that I do, people ask where the inspiration comes from. Are these about me? Are they about people I know? And that's not a question I like to answer because I don't think it's really relevant. But I respond to things in my own life, things that are happening in the lives of my friends, people I know, things that I read or hear about, and also some things that I see at work. I think most of you here know me and know that I work as a forensic photographer. And so a lot of both of my writing and some of my photography is actually influenced by my work in forensics. So sometimes I process what I see at work through writing or image making. And these two pieces, they're kind of vertical, almost scroll-like. They kind of come from the world of forensics. And, you know, it's very difficult. I find forensic science fascinating, but because so much of it has to do with identification, I find it very difficult to incorporate work into my fine art photography work. I don't feel comfortable using, say, fingerprints or anything else that's identifiable. But in this image, you'll see, I acquired a set of slides from the Resource Exchange in Philly, for those of you who are in Philly. And it's a set of slides called Above the Face of the Earth. And they're color slides, but I scanned them and converted them into black and white. And they're literally images from above the earth. And I just remember looking at them. I sat on them for years, not quite sure what to do with them. And then I happened to photograph some forensic anthropology specimens at work. And it was actually this piece that came up in my mind first. So this is Lake Nasser in Egypt. And I had photographed at work one day a skull for a forensic anthropologist. And I had just been looking at that set of slides again the night before, and it just struck me how the sutures of the skull looked very similar to this body of water from above the face of the earth. So I started working on these diptychs. And my intention is to make digital negatives of both at size and then printing them traditionally. But for this show, I had them printed digitally. Don't tell anyone. So that's that diptych. And then back to this one. And I know I said I don't like to use anything that's identifiable. And this fingerprint photo at the top is actually one I took of my own my own fingerprint when I was in grad school for forensics for a paper I did comparing photographic technology and fingerprint photography. And so I've actually gone in and, again, don't tell anyone, I've photoshopped that print so it actually isn't exactly my fingerprint anymore. So there are those two images. And then across this back wall, there are just a couple pieces that I threw together because, again, for those of you who know me, you know that I had lots of technical difficulties with my wet plate. So I ended up with a lot of plates and a lot of extra plates and not really knowing what to do with them. So I just decided just to play around. And make these sort of installation pieces with multiple plates. Again, playing a little bit with the materiality, drilling holes into the plates and then stitching them together with that ribbon. I'll say hi to Carol.
I'm just,
yeah, front row seats. Yep. So this set of images, let me back up a little bit, that kind of curves around this whole section of the gallery. Last year, during the pandemic, I started experimenting a little bit with cyanotype. I mean, I'd done cyanotype before, but I started using it in a very abstract way, which is not the way I usually work. I'm usually pretty anal retentive. Surprise! But with this, what I did, I started with a big sheet of paper and I just kind of randomly, oh geez, my battery's dying.
One extension cord.
I'll go plug it in. Yeah, so I randomly kind of applied the chemistry to this big sheet of paper And then I would, when it was dry, I would go in with a little frame, a 5x7 frame that I'd cut out of a piece of paper, and kind of moved it around and found the shapes that I liked, and I would cut it out. And then I would go back to my writing, and I would just sort of intuitively see like if there were any of these written pieces that I had done that sort of matched the feel and the shape of the cyanotype shape that was created. So this is that set of work, and they are a set actually. For the show, I put these as not for sale because my goal is to just mat and frame them all and have them exist as one set. And like I said, this is a lot different from how I usually work. I'm gonna grab my plug just in case. Yeah, I do a lot of environmental portraiture. And so a lot of the work that's in this show is very different from how I usually operate. So it was very interesting to be working with materiality, doing this very, sorry. Okay, we can talk forever. It's very sort of intuitive workflow with the cyanotypes. It's very different from how I work, but I found it really enjoyable. So it's something I'm going to continue. Okay, so now we're in close quarters because I'm tethered to the wall now. But this last quadrant of the gallery is work that was actually very directly inspired or influenced by the pandemic. Again, I work as a forensic photographer. Right now, I work for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Connecticut. And so I cannot work from home because I cannot have dead bodies at home. So I have to go to work every day. And so at work, we have to wear full PPE. And along this wall, which once the phone charges a little bit, I'll pull out so you can see the whole wall. Oh, okay. Hold on, we're getting an extension cord, hold on. Totally professional level. Here we go. Thanks, Carol. Okay. Yeah, awesome tech crew, pit crew. So these are just my N95 masks. And I think I mentioned like at work, we have to wear full PPE, and I'm often in autopsy for 5 hours, 6 hours or so. So in this next piece, actually, let me pivot a little bit. Again, those of you who know me know when I get home from work, I feel like crap. I have a headache, like I do right now because I work today. I feel dehydrated and hypoxic and just god awful. And I have all these horrible, horrible lines, mask lines on my face, on my hands, just gouging into my face every day that I'm working. And so it really got to me when I would hear people like complaining about having to wear a cloth face covering over their faces for like the 5 minutes it took them to go into the bank or the store. It just seemed really ridiculous when there are people, and I work part-time, so I'm not saying that I'm heroic at all. There are people who are working in hospitals and wearing PPE for 12-hour shifts or longer. And so it just kind of made me a little bit upset to hear people complaining about having to make a quote unquote sacrifice of wearing a piece of cloth over your face for a few minutes when there were people who were making like for other people too, you know, not wearing a face covering when you go in a store. It's helping you, it's helping others. You know, there are people who are being very selfless on the front lines every day. And so this work was just in response to that. So when I was at work, I would, when I came up out of autopsy, I would look at my poor sad face in the mirror and take a picture if I looked particularly hideous and scarred. And that became this. And then, like I said, these are N95 masks. And I just was experimenting a little bit with this in the cyanotype chemistry that I had. And I also have copious amounts of x-rays that I also acquired from the Resource Exchange in Philly. And I did some experimenting. This one's the one that kind of came out the best, although I learned the N95 masks are probably not the best vehicle for photochemistry. But you may be able to see a very faint outline of a chest x-ray on the side of this mask. And so that's kind of what I was going for with these. And this is the one that kind of came out the best. So not the most successful experiment, but it was a fun experiment nonetheless. And that is it for the gallery walkthrough. So if anybody has any questions, or if you want to look at anything specific again, Carol's keeping an eye on the chat. If anybody put anything in the chat, you can do so now if you haven't. I think she can also turn your audio on if anybody wants to say anything with the voice. Oh, a pan. Okay. I know. Oh, well, I don't know if it goes that far. Okay, a pan of the gallery. I'm going to back up as far as I can with the extension cord tethering me. Okay. All right, so I'm just panning around. Let me know if you're seeing what you should be seeing. Okay. And then the one body of work that we won't be able to see in the pan because I can't get far enough out is the Cyanotype Poems, I guess you'd call them. Oh, and these are some zines. Last year was the second year that I self-produced a little zine of my writing. And 2020 was the year of sorrow and rage. And the year before, 2019, was the first year that I did a zine like this. And it was the year of beauty and darkness. And that first one, the year of beauty and darkness, was specifically a short written piece that I had done in response to something that I had seen or experienced at work when I was working as a crime scene investigator and as a medical legal death investigator, paired with something that was a little more uplifting and beautiful, oftentimes a piece that had to do with nature. Last year's was a little less specific. It wasn't pairings like that. It was just my response to various things that happened during 2020. So it's a little more broad and scattered as far as subject matter, but I think maybe a little less dark. I think a few people who got the first one were like, oh my God, we're worried about you.
Yeah, I have a question here.
Yes.
Mark is asking, you mentioned that the workspace informed some of the projects. Can you elaborate? Was it the placid set?
Oh, I think just having a place to work was really important, especially during last year. Like I said, I still had to go to work, so I didn't have the same isolation that a lot of people did if they were quarantining at home by themselves or just with like their cat. But at the same time, I was also quarantining at my mom's house, which might not be ideal. So to have a studio where I can come and just be in my own space. Also, I don't have a workspace at my mom's. So, you know, I wouldn't have been able to do, particularly the tin type work, I wouldn't have been able to do that without this space to do it in. Yes. Does that answer your question, Mark? I expected way more heckling from you.
I didn't want to go there. But thank you. I did have the pleasure of coming to the show in person, and it was very moving, absolutely, and lovely. So the work you did was fantastic. So thank you.
Well, Mark, I have to thank you too, because you were the one who first introduced me to the concept of like flash fiction, which is the very short writing, very short written pieces. And with my crazy work schedule that I've had in the past and just my crazy life schedule, I like to write. Before I became a photographer, when I was a kid, I thought I'd be a writer. But I just don't have the like bandwidth to create long, like a novel or even a short story. And so writing, I always just wrote these short kind of poetic pieces, and I never did anything with them, or I never thought I could do anything with them until you were like, hey, flash fiction, it's a thing. So thank you, McKay.
I loved seeing it incorporated with your photography. So it's fantastic.
Thanks.
May I ask a question?
Of course, Marie.
Oh, okay, thanks. First of all, thank you so much. The space looks really lovely. And the show, I'm so glad that you've found a way to do this virtually, because I couldn't get up there. And I've long loved, everything's beautiful, and I've long loved the Cyanotype poems. And it was interesting to hear your process with that. And am I correct in understanding that you had previously, prior to the creation of the cyanotypes, written various things, and then once you created the large piece and went with your 5x7 frames and found shapes, that you paired them with pre-existent text? Is that accurate?
Yeah. And what I did to get the text was I went through, like I keep a written, not a journal, like I went here today, but like just written stuff. But I went through that and picked out kind of the shorter ones that I thought might work paired with something visual. So I didn't even have this in mind necessarily, but like obviously like a long written piece wouldn't necessarily go well with like a big blue blob. So I picked out like the shorter pieces that I thought might work paired with an image or matched with an image. And so I had like a notebook just with those all written, or I typed it out. So I had a sheet with all of these like 1 or 2 line written pieces typed out. And so when I would do the whole sheet and cut them out, and then kind of just feel like what felt like it went with what shape. So yeah, they were I didn't write any of the pieces like specifically to match the cyanotype shape. And I also didn't create the cyanotype shapes in order to match the written pieces. Everything is just like very intuitive and very like gut reaction. So like I said, it's not how I usually work, but it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way that perhaps subconsciously, I mean, it was operating in sync before you even put it together. I mean, I don't know that, but that process of creation sounds fascinating. So thank you for confirming my perception.
Yeah. And they're definitely like, I have different versions of some of these where like I would do a shape and type the text on there, and then I wasn't really happy with it, and then another shape would pop up and I'd be like, oh, that might fit better with these words. So I have like maybe second or third options for some of them, and there's some that I'm still not happy with, so it'll be ongoing, I think.
Anyway, grazie and bravissima.
Thanks, Marie. Anybody else have any questions or heckling to do? Not nearly enough heckling. All right. Oh, okay. So last chance to dance, everybody. I have to jump off so that Carol can jump on, because with the two devices in the same place, feedback, it's awful. So if you have any last questions or comments or anything for me, now's the time. Okay. All right, so here's Carol.
Thank you so much, Dale. That was, okay, so I had the front row seat. So I had the pleasure of getting a personal tour, which when she had the opening, I was running a reception down the way for both shows. And so the work is powerful. We have loved having you here, you know, kind of sneaking in and out, and, you know, hopefully getting things done in a way that was comfortable for you. I love this Artist in Residence program because people come in and they say, I'm thinking of doing this or doing that, and then right, left, and middle turns happen along the way. And so I love hearing the story, and I love the fact that we were able to do that. We've never done this before at the Art Center. And this was all Dale. She's like, well, you know, I have this nonprofit in Philly and we do artist talks. So we made it happen, and your phone didn't die. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. And huge congratulations, Dale. So thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you so much.
Well, the guest of honor left there. She said, you're welcome. She left the meeting early. Our pleasure. It's great. I learned something new. Yay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Take
thanks
care,
again.
everyone. Ciao, ciao.